Welcome, everybody. This is Robb Ryerse, the political director of Vote Common Good, and this is the Common Good Candidates podcast, where we have conversations with the extraordinary, ordinary Americans who have climbed into the arena and decided to run for political office. Today, you get to listen in on a conversation with that I'm going to have with Michelle Higgs. And we're going to chat about what it's like to run in the state of Indiana for the state legislature. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. Hey, let's begin with the end in mind. It's November 6th.
Mm-hmm.
What have you accomplished? What are you proud of? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling exceptionally proud to have everyday people's voices, especially rural Hoosier voices, back in the conversation. I'm especially proud that over the summer, August and September, I organized 8 House candidates across 21 counties, which covers about 23% of Indiana, for what we call our Indiana Rural Summit. And I'll talk more probably about that later. But just looking at the landscape and the fact that we are all coming together. It's not one single person. It is combinations of people running for office, people supporting those candidates, people in the trenches doing the work through organizing, through nonprofit work, all of that, to actually push back the narrative. First off, that Indiana is not politically active. We actually are. And we are heavily played in the narrative around, especially around Christian nationalism and around legislation that gets passed. It starts here and goes nationwide. And
Mhm.
so I feel like just standing firm and saying, no, not on our watch, that's going to be the thing that I'm most proud of.
Yeah, yeah. So, how did you decide to run for Indiana State Legislature? You're in District 60, which is
Mhm.
just north of Bloomington, kind of in central Indiana. How did you decide that this was going to be the race you were going to jump into?
I'm going to circle back to gerrymandering because when I moved back to Indiana in 2016 to be back with my family, my family originally moved to Indiana when I was 14, and we lived in Martinsville, Indiana. And when I came back in 2016, I got involved in local organizing, and one of the issues that we were working with happened to do with water contamination that was in my hometown. And so just getting involved with that and seeing that it almost didn't matter how many people we took to the state house. They weren't listening to the people. They were listening to people, lobbyists and other interests. And so fast forward to earlier this year, and I'm actually involved with a group called Reverse Citizens United, and we were talking again about how money influences our legislature and how gerrymandering actually keeps people out of being able to even see some of the things that are happening. And so it just so happened that where I currently live, 2 houses down is a completely different district. And I'm in a county that is, we've got 2 precincts of Monroe County, but 33 of Morgan County, of which Martinsville is part of, and realizing that nobody was running against the incumbent who has been there since 2012. And so if there's nobody running, then why would people show up to vote if there's nothing to vote for that's different? And so at the time, I was like, well, I've never really done this before. I've organized people, but this is a completely different thing. And also, in organizing, I had been intentionally nonpartisan. So to step into electoral work, which is partisan, is just a completely different shift.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things that this happened to be the door that opened. And I was fully waiting for people to say, "Oh, thank you, Michelle, but we have somebody else." And that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Um, so that was also an eye opener of just the vacuum that is there.
Mm.
And I think it's really given me a passion to see that without actually taking and using my organizing skills in this arena, we risk having candidates run and burn out
Mhm.
and recycle, and we never move forward. So, yeah,
Mm.
it's been such a learning thing that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah. So what's it? I mean, you're not a career politician. You've been involved in organizing, as you mentioned. Um, well, what's it like running for office? Take us inside, like, like people can't even imagine this is all like the image they have in their head is like, what they've seen on the West Wing. And like, it's not
Yeah.
like that. It's not like that. Like, what's it like running for office?
I keep waiting for the West Wing moment. I really
Right.
do. And I think what's probably surprises me is so many people are trying to figure it out on the fly.
Mhm.
We would talk about like you're trying to land a plane while you're still building it.
Yep.
Um, but for me, and all I can my again, my experience is Indiana. What I see is that at the national level, Indiana is seen as a flyover state. And so it's kind of invisible, at least especially in Democrat circles. Um, but the county and the district that I'm representing, I call it the drive-through district. It
Mhm.
has 2 major freeways. People are going between, say, Bloomington and Indiana or Indianapolis. They're headed to the airport. It's one of those where when I've asked people, I'm like, "How often have you stopped at the towns along the way?" And very few people will raise their hand and say they have. So what this does is it when people feel invisible, they feel like they're not part of the solution even. And stepping into the arena to run for office has felt, I think, where there are, if it's a flippable seat or if there is a high profile candidate, there seems to be a lot of support and resources. But for lower down ballot candidates, rural districts, it's pretty isolating
Yeah.
and alone. And so that was probably the most shocking thing for me. I thought there was a little more organization across the board. And you laugh because you've been
Oh,
here.
I know. I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people have this sense of I think a lot of folks have this sense that like political parties are very organized and they work like a machine, and you even like hear about like, oh, the political machine. Like so many places in the United States, it is not that way at all. And if you run for office, you're jumping in and making it up as you go along. And I mean, I tell candidates all the time, the cavalry's not coming. Like you've got to make this happen. Now, it's totally worth it and tremendously important. This is not a negative thing necessarily. It's not a critical thing. It's just hey, we got to be honest about the situation.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that excites me about your campaign, Michelle, is your background as an organizer. So many campaigns that like far too many campaigns like follow the leave no trace rule. You go to a park and there's those signs that say leave no trace, like make it look like you were never here. So many campaigns do that. Somebody runs for office and then they lose, and the next cycle somebody's starting over from scratch and there's no infrastructure to build on. So it sounds like you're doing some interesting and intentional things to build relationships among candidates. To you mentioned the rural caucus. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And what are you doing to leave a trace, to build some infrastructure that can make a difference, not just in this election but in elections to come?
um, it's super important for me to look at the base that's there in my district, right? So um, because I cross three counties, I very quickly realized that two of my counties on the farthest end, Monroe and Johnson, actually had pretty sizable bases, very supportive. And the main base in Morgan County was emerging. It was growing. It was very active, very energetic, but what we call small and mighty. And so one of the first things I knew just looking at it was I need to bring in the two outer, kind of like the giant Oreo cookie, right? Bring
Hmm.
in their support and connect them so that they are developing their own relationships, but they're building because after I'm gone, there's going to be other candidates and other people, and that base has to grow and it has to hold the infrastructure of what we're doing. The other thing that I realized too was, particularly in Morgan County, they're down ballot locally. There's only two candidates in this next election. We have someone running for county council,
Mm.
someone running for coroner, and that's it. And so even the
Wait a minute.
way
Time out. Time out. Time out. Time out. Did you say someone running for coroner? Is
yes,
coroner is a position that you elect in
yes,
Indiana?
yep, it's an elected position. And actually, the gentleman running for coroner, his name's Tom Wallace. I'm going to shout him out. He's amazing. But one of the things that he opened my eyes to was that the role that the coroner has is they can look at data. He's a data person. So when you have communities, I know.
Sorry. Like I think of coroner as like a medical person or like as a he's a data person. Okay.
Well, I mean, he's actually an environmental
Yeah.
engineer, and he's
Yeah.
very, very smart. But all that to say, like when we were talking about the fact that, and I say this quite a bit, the hospital where my brother was born no longer delivers babies. It's
Mm,
become a regional cancer center. These are the things where people see it happen, but they don't
yep.
actually often ask why. And Tom was at the forefront when they were looking at the water and what was going on, and so for him, it kind of makes really good sense. Like he's going to be able to see, are there trends? Is
Mm,
there something happening further
yeah.
down? Which
Yeah.
I'd never heard anybody in that role think of it in that way.
Yeah. Now
Um,
I got a sidetrack talking about electing a coroner, which is just
so
hilarious to me. But the idea of the importance of having as many people on the ballot as possible, even if it's a long shot. I mean,
yeah,
I have a friend who calls me the patron saint of lost causes, and I know what it's like to run a campaign where you're not going to win, but like why is that so important? And how when in you mentioned kind of getting some people to run, what's that look like in terms of kind of how you're organizing candidates?
I feel like it's getting the conversation out there, getting people to actually see that there's choice, but more importantly, we get sidetracked into the federal narrative over and over
Mm,
and over again, and the federal is very divisive, and the federal feels very distant from people. So
mm,
they'll argue about that and then come back and still have the kitchen table conversations around jobs and housing and healthcare and all of that
mhm.
and and not realize that it's their local electeds and their state legislature particularly is becoming more and more powerful,
Yep.
and yet most people are removed from that. And so having people at the very local level all the way up to hold that space, to hold those conversations, to keep in the forefront, and remind people what those roles actually do and how they impact. I talk to people all the time about how, the local judiciary is probably one of the most powerful in your own context. And
Mhm.
it's sometimes harder than heck to find out what people's positions are when they're running for those offices. We don't have ballot initiatives in Indiana. When I moved here, we had come from California where they did, and that
Mhm.
is quite a shock too. When if there's nothing to vote for, and all you are looking at is people, and there's nobody to vote for on your ballot, why would you show up
Yep.
for anything else? And so it's hugely important to start to fill this out, and have people have a reason to come out.
Yep. Yep. So what are the issues that matter to you and the people of Central Indiana?
I would say the four core issues for me, and when I'm talking to people, is healthcare, and that
Mm.
means access to reproductive health care, mental health care, prescription drugs. Um, it's also housing, access to housing, and safe housing too for renters. I've been involved with a lot of tenant protection stuff, and I'm a small landlord, so during COVID, particularly, seeing how the difference between those that were committed to keeping people in their homes and those
Yeah.
that were just chomping at the bit to evict. Um, Also, education. Right now, Indiana is proposing being kind of a guinea pig for a new high school diploma process, and they're still shaping it out, but it's shifting from your more classical, traditional college career path. They're trying to bring in, obviously, trade and apprenticeship, which is good. However, the way that they're talking about it, it's taking juniors and seniors and putting them into a path of working paid jobs as
Yeah.
part of their thing.
Yeah.
And
Free labor for companies, right?
so we're looking at particularly small town and rural, where what are the jobs that are there? How can they get to those jobs? What's the protections for children? So it's a
Yeah.
whole host of things that are playing out there. And then lastly, going to jobs, um, one of the things that we talk about is livable wages. What are the benefits? Hearing about jobs that are coming in where companies are getting tax abatements and tax benefits, and yet the employment that's coming in is temporary workers, or it's maybe 50 high paying jobs at the expense of the 2,000 jobs that used to be here, and calling that good,
Yeah.
when what I'm seeing particularly alarmingly is, we're trying to be the center for a lot of technology and innovation, but they're bringing in data centers and cryptocurrency mining, and both of those industries are high resource
Yeah.
industries. And so I'm like, I'm a little leery of let's just open the floodgates for that and not having a robust conversation
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
environment.
So one of the things that matters to us a lot at Vote Common Good is the threat of Christian nationalism. And Christian nationalism is really taking hold in state legislatures around the country. Is that the case in Indiana? And what's that look like? How has that informed your campaign?
So the threat of Christian nationalism, it's one of those things where so many of the small towns, they're I would say they are very deeply religious, a lot of faithful people. However, it's really been co-opted into, the number of signs that you go by that say, I believe in God, guns, and family, or whatever. And
Yeah.
and yeah, the disconnect to actually ask the deeper questions. The other thing is that single issue voting that has been pretty much in my lifetime, around abortion. That becomes that line in the sand for so many people, but they don't actually wrestle with the nuance of it.
Yeah.
And so when that gets co-opted by these, what I would call bad actors and false prophets and a whole host of things, um, it there's a certain level of deception. There's I would almost say too, what I'm seeing is, um, it's almost like a trauma or a PTSD that's playing out with through fawning. And so
Yeah.
because people have spiritual trauma, and that's a real thing, it's now playing out on this political stage. And I think it's groups, and organizations such as yours that are naming these things and bringing it out into it's like, can we call this what it is? Can we say this is a problem? And there's a lot of people who they're locked behind
Yeah.
um, protected walls.
Yeah. So you mentioned that your district, you kind of call it a drive-through district.
Mm.
Um, what should we know about Indiana District 60? Like what to the average person that maybe is just driven through, what should we know? What's great about where you're at there in central Indiana?
I think part of it is that the term central, like it is in
Mm,
the middle of so many different things. It is easily connected. Um, it's beautiful. We're a mixture of rural and part of it is very hilly and agricultural, but also the quintessential small towns.
mm,
And my hometown of Martinsville, when I moved there as a teenager, I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's an actual town square and a candy shop." And at the time, there was a drugstore where you could go and get your soda and your ice cream float or whatever. And I don't know,
mm,
uh, it was just so picturesque. And I think
yeah.
that when people are talking about, the Make America Great or going back, there is a longing for community and small town where you know people and you're doing things together. And one of the beautiful things that I'm seeing emerge post-COVID now is again coming back to the weekly events, the things
Mm,
around the town. You see it a lot in the summertime with the county fairs and the town fairs and the parades. And I think that that's becoming more amplified of people are tired of a toxic polarization. So they're trying to find ways of reconnecting and re-engaging
mm,
socially. And I'm seeing that happen more and more in my district. Um, and I think also what I would love to see, is how public transportation could impact amazingly. I'm a huge proponent of light rail, and I so wish we had that, because there's some areas where I'm going, if people could just be able to easily get to a job in a bigger city
yeah.
or branch out and visit, it would, like, economically be such a boon,
Yeah.
for people, but yeah, it's a beautiful area.
Mm, mm. Sounds like it. Um, so we ask voters to use the common good as their voting criteria, and we ask people like you that are running for office, that if you're elected, to use the common good as your governing criteria. When when you hear a phrase like the common good, what's that mean to you? How do you kind of shape that in your mind?
For me, it starts I really with, the golden rule,
Mm,
and the fact that, everything I look at is from a lens of people first, and
mm,
common good is, like, what benefits all of us,
yeah.
what raises everybody up, and then I think also, looking at where are the most vulnerable, where are the people being marginalized, and then focusing on things that by helping them, by actually bringing their voice into the conversation, chances are they've got the answers to some of the big problems.
Mm.
And so to me that benefits everybody.
Yeah, yeah. We're big fans of that Paul Wellstone quote. We all do better when we all do better.
Yes,
They're like, yep,
exactly,
that's
exactly.
how it works. How do you stay positive? How do you stay motivated? How do you stay energized for this work?
Mm. For me, it's really the North Star is the policies that I wanna
Mhm.
see, the Indiana I want to see,
Mm,
we talk a lot about it takes a village to raise a child, and we need to return to what does that village look like? And so when I focus on that, when I focus on people, when I focus on the conversations that I have with people at the door or at the fairs or wherever, and they're they're genuinely sharing their heart, um, that's what gives me hope. That's what gives me the energy and the fire. If I languish in the politics of things, if
mm,
I all of that, that's where it's very depleting.
yeah.
And so it's really just staying focused on people.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that phrase, languish in the politics of things. That is well said. Michelle, how can people find you? What
Yeah.
how can they help? What do you need?
So, the most immediate thing right now is just support for our Rural Summit cohort and our tour. So for that, they can go to indianaruralsummit.org. That we've got a fun video there and some links. And then for me, again, go to my website, voteformichellehiggs.com, and I have a blog there, so definitely read that. And donate. I'm looking for people to donate, especially if you are out of state and frustrated maybe with national politics.
Yep.
I know you're probably being bombarded with 50,000 text messages from people asking for donations. But here's the thing, investing in our little rural summit group, not only is it 8 House candidates, but we actually cover 4 congressional districts and 1
Mhm.
Senate seat. So if you want to impact, a dollar spent in Indiana actually goes pretty far.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. And it's so important for people to remember that, like, and I say that I live in Arkansas, and I say this all the time, that like what happens in Arkansas doesn't stay in Arkansas.
Yeah,
And what happens in Indiana doesn't stay in Indiana. And that's both positive and negative. Like the horrible things that our state legislatures end up doing, like they end up at the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden they're not, like, they impact everybody.
yeah,
But also the good stuff doesn't stay there either. Like, and so people investing in the good work that you're doing, and common good candidates like you, Michelle, is like it can go so far.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the last thing I wanna say is, one of the phrases that we've kind of taken back is the "E pluribus unum," out of many
Mm,
one. That's become our mantra against gerrymandering. It's like, we're going to push back. And so when I was at our state, convention, I was in various rooms, with our congressional districts, and I would lead them, and I would say, "E pluribus unum," and then we'd all shout back, "Out of many one," and it was so incredibly energizing.
mm,
Um, and I do feel like it ties back into our founding fathers, that people are longing to get back rooted into why our country was founded, and really our, Declaration of Independence, and all of that, and so it's important. It's
yeah.
important.
Michelle, thank you for sharing yourself and your campaign with us today.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for listening in on this conversation with Michelle Higgs, candidate for the Indiana State Legislature. Conversations like this will be happening every Wednesday between now and Election Day, right here on the Vote Common Good podcast network. You can learn more about Michelle and the other candidates for Common Good by visiting candidatesforcommongood.org.